Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something that, well, it sounds a bit technical maybe, but the economic scale is just, honestly, it's staggering.
Mm,
We're doing a deep dive into the global economic costs of aquatic invasive alien species.
that's right. We're unpacking this really important paper by Ross and Cuthbert and colleagues. It came out in Science of the Total Environment back in 2021.
Yeah, a really comprehensive piece.
It is, and our goal today really is to kind of synthesize what they found, the global patterns, the trends, and maybe most importantly, the huge knowledge gaps when it comes to these aquatic invasives, or IAS.
Right, we're essentially putting a price tag on something usually talked about just in ecological terms.
Exactly, and it matters, doesn't it? Because attacking that dollar figure, it makes the threat much more real.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
our aquatic ecosystems, lakes, rivers, oceans, they're so vital, aren't they? Food, flood protection, all that.
Totally, but they're increasingly vulnerable. Think about global shipping, all the canals and waterways we've built,
Yeah.
global trade. It's all pathways for these species.
And turning that ecological damage into hard economic costs. Well, that makes policymakers sit up and take notice. It's harder to ignore a billion-dollar problem.
Precisely. So let's get into how they did it. The study's foundation is this massive database.
Right, the InvaCost database.
Yeah, InvaCost version 3 specifically. It's a huge effort, basically collecting all the reported economic costs of invasive species from all over the world.
And crucially, they standardized it, right? Because a cost from 1975 in one currency isn't the same as one from 2015 in another.
Exactly. Standardization is absolutely key. They converted everything to the value of the US dollar in 2017.
Okay, so that gives a fair comparison, apples to apples.
And they were careful about what they included, too, not just the fully aquatic species, fish or plants living entirely underwater.
Ah, they also looked at semi-aquatic species.
They did, and this turns out to be really important. These are species that maybe only spend part of their life cycle, like the larval stage, in water.
Okay, I can see how that distinction would matter. Tell me a bit more about why separating those out is significant.
Well, think about something like a mosquito. The adults might cause problems on land, but the larvae, they're developing in standing water.
Ah, right. So the management has to target that aquatic phase, even if the main economic impact feels terrestrial.
Exactly. It affects where you target your efforts and how you calculate the costs. Their inclusion was, well, pretty revealing, as we'll see.
Gotcha. So with this big standardized database covering both types, what were the main questions Cuthbert and the team were trying to answer?
They had a few core questions, like how are the costs distributed? Which types of organisms, invertebrates, vertebrates, plants cost the most?
And geographically, too, I assume. Where are the hotspots?
Yes, geography was key. And also the type of cost. Is it mostly money spent cleaning up the damage and dealing with losses? Or is it money spent on management, prevention, control, research?
That damage versus management balance seems critical.
It really is. And finally, they wanted to compare. How do the costs and the knowledge gaps for aquatic IAS stack up against terrestrial IAS, which generally get a lot more attention?
Okay, let's get to the big number then, the headline finding. What's the total reported cost they found?
Right, the number to remember, conservatively summing up all the documented costs reported since around 1971, it comes to US $345 billion.
Wow. $345 billion, and that's conservative and only what's been reported.
Exactly. It's a massive figure. And when you break it down by the type of organism, it's really not evenly spread.
Okay, who's doing the most damage, financially speaking?
Invertebrates. They accounted for the lion's share, 62% of the total cost. That's about $214 billion.
62%. Okay, what about vertebrates and plants?
Vertebrates came in next at 28%, roughly $97 billion. And plants were a smaller slice, about 6%, or $20 billion.
So invertebrates are really punching above their weight class cost-wise. Did they identify any specific heavy hitters, like the worst offenders?
Oh, yeah. They found that just the top 10 most costly genera were responsible for a staggering 88% of the total documented costs.
88% from just 10 groups. Who's number one on that list?
This goes right back to that semi-aquatic point we discussed.
Yeah.
The single biggest cost driver, mosquitoes. Specifically, the As genus.
Mosquitoes again. How much were they responsible for?
They caused, wait for it, $153 billion in damages. Just that one genus.
Good grief. That's nearly half of the entire $345 billion total right there, or at least half of the top 10 costs. Why so high for mosquitoes?
It's almost entirely down to public health impacts. We're talking vector-borne diseases, Zika, dengue, chikungunya.
Ah, so the cost isn't damage to pipes or fisheries, it's healthcare costs, lost productivity.
Exactly. The study found that damage to the health sector made up 73% of all the costs linked specifically to those mosquitoes.
That makes a chilling kind of sense. Who else was on that heavy hitters list?
Well, you had Ruffa, that's a fish, Gymnocephalus cernua, and the ones many people have heard of, zebra and quagga mussels, the Dusnina species.
Ah, yes, infamous for clogging up water intake pipes, damaging infrastructure.
Precisely. Huge costs for power plants, water treatment facilities, things like that, and resource depletion, too.
Now, a number like $345 billion. How confident can we be in it? Is it based on solid data?
That's a fair question. The researchers looked at the reliability of the source data, and they found that about 79% of that total, so around $274 billion, came from highly reliable sources.
What counts as highly reliable?
Peer-reviewed scientific papers or official government reports where you could trace the calculations. So yeah, the bulk of it is built on pretty solid ground.
Okay, that's reassuring. Let's shift to geography now. Where are these costs actually being reported? Is it evenly spread across the globe?
Not even close. It's incredibly skewed. North America reported far and away the highest costs.
How much?
48% of the global total. That's $166 billion. And that's overwhelmingly driven by the USA.
Okay, nearly half the reported costs from North America alone. Who's next?
Asia comes in second, but it's a distant second. About 13% of the total, which is around $45 billion.
So North America and Asia account for, what, over 60% of the reported costs between them?
Correct. Which immediately tells you something interesting.
Yeah, it probably tells us more about where the research and the reporting are happening rather than where the absolute worst impacts are, right?
Exactly that. This is where the knowledge gaps become really stark. Consider this. Africa, Oceania, and the subantarctic regions combined.
Let me guess. Tiny percentage.
Just 0.6% of the reported costs. That's only $2.1 billion altogether.
0.6%. That's shocking.
It means vast areas of the world, particularly many countries in Africa and Asia, have zero reported economic costs for aquatic IAS in this database.
Despite the fact that we know there are major problems there. You mentioned the Nile perch earlier.
Right. Nile perch in Lake Victoria had catastrophic impacts on native fish, local fisheries, livelihoods. But those costs often aren't captured in a standardized economic database like this. Same for impacts on water infrastructure, say from invasive plants clogging waterways in parts of Africa.
So that $345 billion figure, while huge, is almost certainly a massive underestimate of the true global burden.
Without a doubt, the geographic gaps alone suggest that.
Okay, let's talk about the type of cost. You mentioned damage versus management. What did the breakdown look like there?
This, for me, was one of the most concerning findings. The overwhelming majority of the costs, 74%, or $256 billion, were driven by damages and losses.
So money spent dealing with the consequences after the invasion has happened. Cleaning up, lost revenue, health costs.
Precisely. Now compare that to the amount spent on management expenditure.
Okay, what was that percentage? Management being prevention, control, research.
Only 6%. Just $21 billion out of the $345 billion total was reported as management spending.
6%. Seriously. So for every dollar spent on trying to prevent or control these things, we're spending, what, more than $12 dealing with the damage they cause?
That's what the reported data suggests. It's a really skewed ratio. Now, you wouldn't expect management to cost more than the damage. That wouldn't make economic sense.
No, of course not.
But 6% is incredibly low. It points towards either a huge underreporting of smaller management efforts, or maybe more likely, a systemic global lack of proactive investment.
We're basically waiting for the disaster to happen and then paying to clean it up, rather than investing up front to stop it.
It certainly looks like we're stuck in a reactive cycle based on these numbers.
Okay, what about trends over time? Is this a legacy problem or is it getting worse?
It's definitely getting worse, and rapidly. The costs have been increasing exponentially since around 1960.
Exponentially.
Yes. They saw a particularly sharp jump by 3 orders of magnitude between 1970 and 2000. This isn't slowing down.
Did they estimate a recent annual cost? For a single year?
They did. Using their best-fitting statistical model, they predicted the annual global cost for the year 2020 alone would be around US $23 billion.
$23 billion
Yeah.
in just 1 year.
Yeah. And just to give you some context for that number,
Please.
that single-year cost for aquatic IAS is likely higher than the estimated annual cost of managing all the world's marine protected areas combined.
Wow. Okay, that puts it into perspective. More than managing all MPAs globally.
Which runs somewhere between, say, $5 and $19 billion a year, depending on the estimate. So yeah, $23 billion is a significant annual hit.
All right, now for what you hinted might be the most surprising part, this aquatic versus terrestrial comparison.
Right. This is where things get really interesting and, frankly, a bit concerning about our global priorities.
So we know roughly what percentage of all known invasive alien species are associated with aquatic habitats.
Yeah, the paper states that about 26% of established alien species worldwide have some link to aquatic environments, whether fully or semi-aquatic.
Okay, about a quarter of the species. So you'd maybe expect them to account for roughly a quarter of the total invasion costs documented in InvaCost, right?
Logically, yes, or at least something in that ballpark, but that's not what they found. Not at all.
What do they find?
Aquatic species accounted for only 5% of the total global invasion costs recorded in the entire InvaCost database.
5%, down from 26% of the species.
Yep. 26% of the known species, but only 5% the documented economic cost.
That's a massive disparity. What does that tell us?
It strongly suggests a systemic bias. We seem to be much better at, or perhaps more focused on, tracking and reporting the costs of terrestrial invasions. Think about agriculture, forestry. The impacts there are often more immediately obvious and quantifiable in economic terms.
Whereas aquatic impacts might be harder to measure or happen in systems that aren't as closely monitored economically.
That's likely part of it. And there's another layer of bias within the aquatic category itself.
Oh, between the fully aquatic and semi-aquatic ones we talked about earlier?
Exactly. Remember mosquitoes driving a huge chunk of the cost? It turns out that 54% of all the reported aquatic costs actually came from semi-aquatic species like mosquitoes or coipus.
So more than half the aquatic cost is from things that aren't even fully living in the water all the time. What about purely marine species, invaders in the oceans?
Get this, only 1% of the total recorded aquatic cost was attributed to fully marine invasive species.
1%. For all the oceans, with all the global shipping moving species around. That seems incredibly low.
It's astonishingly low. It screams massive knowledge gap. We are almost certainly missing huge costs associated with marine invasions.
So we have this huge disparity between aquatic and terrestrial costs overall, and then within aquatic, a bias towards semi-aquatic and away from marine.
Right.
What does this mean for management spending? You mentioned a funding gap earlier.
Right. The researchers did a calculation. They asked, what if management spending wasn't biased? What if it was allocated simply based on the proportion of known alien species in each habitat type?
Okay, so if 26% of alien species are aquatic, roughly 26% of management funds should go towards them.
In a perfectly unbiased world, yes. Based on that logic, they estimated that an additional US $39 billion should have been spent specifically on managing aquatic invasive species to date, compared to what has actually been recorded in the database.
$39 billion. That's the estimated cost of neglecting proactive management for aquatic systems relative to terrestrial ones.
That's the size of the gap, yes, based on the known species distribution.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. We have a massive documented cost of $345 billion, but it's highly conservative.
Highly conservative because of huge gaps, taxonomic gaps, massive geographic gaps, especially in Africa and Asia, and likely temporal gaps too. Older costs might be lost.
And the trend is worrying costs are rising exponentially, and the analysis suggests they are nowhere near leveling off.
Not at all. The cumulative cost curve is still accelerating. It's far from reaching any kind of saturation point. We can expect these costs to keep climbing, especially with ongoing global trade and climate change, making things easier for invaders.
So what's the main takeaway message here? What should people, especially policymakers, do with this information?
Well, first, these findings should be a major wake-up call. We need much better and more consistent cost reporting globally, especially in those underrepresented regions.
Because you can't manage what you don't measure.
Right.
If the costs aren't documented, it's hard to justify spending money.
Precisely. We need the data to make the economic case for action.
And in terms of action itself, given that appalling 6% management versus 74% damage ratio,
the crucial recommendation has to be invest urgently and proactively in management. Specifically, prevention first, and then rapid detection and eradication for new incursions.
shift the spending away from just cleaning up the mess afterwards.
Yes, we need a global shift towards preventing these invasions in the first place. Prevention is almost always far, far cheaper in the long run than dealing with a widespread invasion after it's established. That 6% figure needs to go up significantly.
It really is sobering. $345 billion documented cost, potentially $23 billion per year recently,
Yeah.
and yet we're spending pennies on the dollar on prevention compared to damage control.
It is. And it leads to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Go on.
If we know that aquatic invasion costs are so dramatically underreported compared to terrestrial ones, and if we know vast regions of the world are reporting essentially zero costs right now, despite clear ecological impacts, then you have to wonder just how much ecological devastation is happening out there, particularly in our oceans and in developing nations, that currently has no price tag attached to it at all. How much damage are we simply not seeing in economic terms?
And how does that invisible cost warp our global conservation priorities? If we only fund based on the reported economic damage we can easily measure.
Exactly. It raises some pretty fundamental questions about whether we're focusing our limited conservation resources effectively when the economic scale of the aquatic problem might be so much larger than we currently realize.
A really challenging thought to end on. Thank you so much for walking us through this paper today. It's been incredibly insightful.
My pleasure. It's crucial work.
And thank you, as always, for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you'll join us again next time.